Welcome back. So I need to address something just kind of up front. I had thought that when I was creating assignments that I was reusing everything from the previous semester's stuff, meaning that the videos and everything that I was posting, I had assumed were being posted in the assignment page. However, that has not been the case, and I wanted to apologize for that. Don't worry about your grades if they were reflected in that light. So anyway, just kind of moving on. We're going to pick up just essentially where we were today, which is to say that we focused on using aperture as a means of illustrating focus in an image. So we started off with these three images here. We looked at kind of each of these in turn as what they might reflect in terms of their aperture value. Okay. Obviously, we have a very narrow depth of field and a very pointed point of focus in this image. So we know that we have a very low, numerically speaking, aperture value. And in fact, on this image, the aperture was at a setting of 1.4. We know that because we have a very narrow depth of field and a very narrow area of focus, right? Remember, it being a plane, we have this little strip of focus, and you can see physically how wide that is. It's not very wide. It's maybe 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 inch wide. As we go up to this, we go from 1.4 to 5.6, and we start to see our point of focus not necessarily growing, right? If we look at the plane of focus here, it's not terribly bigger, right? They're pretty similar, right? But where we do see is that the image, everything in front of and behind it becomes more clear. And then when we bump to this, which was at f22, or f16 rather, we can see that we gain a lot more area of focus, right? We can see the skull on my desk, the mouse, whatever that is. Is that a remote, I guess? Is it a remote? Regrettably, I don't remember what this is when I placed it there, but there it is. Okay, so using aperture as a form of emphasis, right? We know that we emphasize these keys and anything that might have been in that area by focusing on it, simply using a low numeric aperture value to focus on that. Now, we redid the assignment. We just kind of recycled it today. We didn't necessarily have a new submission. However, we just had a little bit of re-instruction on this one. There was a whole bunch of people who submitted and were close, and then there were only a handful that really nailed it. So I wanted to go over it again just to make sure that we understood what we're doing. The biggest critique that I have is that no one was standing close enough to their subject when they took the picture. So remember, you want to really close that gap. Get very, very, very close into the distance between you and your subject in order to emphasize your focal point, such as in this image. Okay, we opened up in Lightroom with these handful of images, and we discussed the linear gradient and the radial gradient. So when you've got Lightroom, excuse me, we also discussed the brush. When you import these images into Lightroom, let's look at how the gradient tools work to help us edit. The three tools that we're working on today are the brush here, the linear gradient, and then the radial gradient. So for this image, we're going to start with the linear gradient. And how the linear gradient works is we click and drag. And what that is going to do is create 3 lines. And as I drag, still holding my original click, as I drag this out, you can see that they scale proportionally. Okay. Now what this is representing is your gradient, right? Gradient, it's a grade or gradual change, okay? So what these lines indicate is that this line here on the right, okay, this line here, indicates where the effect of my change will be at its maximum, or in other words, my opacity will be at 100%. The middle line represents where it is at 50%, and then the left line represents, in this case, where it is at 0%. We can visualize that by hovering over the blue dot, and you can see that we have a gradual change from 100% opacity to 0% opacity, moving from the right to the left. Okay? Now, the wider I make the bands here, farther apart I space them, the more gradual the effect will be. The closer I place them, the more immediate the effect is. Right? There's less time for it to get from 100% opacity to 0% opacity. Okay? Now, where are we going to use this? Well, we've got this image of this lady, and on the broad side of her face is well lit, and then the short side over here is very poorly lit. Well, it's just not as lit. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a gradient here, and we're going to have our midpoint where we get 50% opacity about here. So we've got a nice even transition from here to here. If I hover over it, I can see where I maybe want it to be, about right there. So I really want the maximum effect to start happening about here. Remember, 100's over here. So then from here, I can just adjust my sliders. Okay. If I go all the way, you can see it's a very, very stark difference. But if I go maybe half a stop or one stop, increase my highlights, increase my shadows, excuse me, you know, we can make this a better illuminated image. Okay. Now, what happens if we, you know, bring them really close together? Well, we'll get that effect more immediately, right? And then it kind of creates this nice artistic effect, okay, that maybe we meant to do this. Now we've got a little bit of overexposure here, so what we can do with the gradient tool is just use our eraser and just erase a part of it. So it's still taking effect, but we just erased that part where it's taking effect. Now this is good for temperature or color, if you want to split tone something or you want to increase blues or yellows, magentas or greens, whatever, we can do it that way too. Okay, so lots of fun. All right, then let's look at this image. This is image number 3 on Canvas. Just drag it over the Lightroom icon or import it into Lightroom to work on it. Okay, so for this, we're using circles now. So as opposed to lines, we're using circles. Now for this image where we have a nice sunny corner, we can use our radial gradient tool in such a way that is going to simulate the sun. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll draw it here, and as we hover over it, again, you can see its main effect is in the middle, and then it feathers out to 0 as we get from here to here. Okay, and up here, you might have noticed, you can turn your feathering down. So if we could go to 50% or 60%, it will get harder as it gets closer to the edge, all the way down to 0, where it will just look like a circle. Okay, let's maybe go about 50%. So about right there. Okay, so then to simulate the sun in this image, I'm going to just increase my temperature a whole bunch, increase my exposure to kind of give it that washed out look. We could do highlights. We could oversaturate it. There's a bunch that we can do here. Increase the whites, etc. Okay. Now, one thing that you can also use this for is where we have these nice like iridescent goggles on her head. You could also use this as like a lens flare to make it look like the sun was sort of rebounding really hard off the glasses there. Okay, and it's not great, but it looks okay. We can increase our feathering a whole bunch to make it look about like that, something like that. Okay, and that's our radial gradient. The other time that you'll use your radial gradient, I'm just going to bring up this picture of my kid just to see if it'll work. You can use your radial gradient to make applications over specular highlights on faces, right? Because they're typically more round than square and flat, like the linear gradient will give us. So if I hover over this, go about right there, and then we're kind of encapsulating that whole thing. So then, and I'm just going to try this. I haven't tried this before, so it'll probably turn out poorly, but you know, I can decrease the highlights there to make his forehead look less huge. So there we go. Good for cheeks too. You know, if we have this lady here with really specular highlights on her cheeks or forehead or maybe hair, we could do other things there. Okay, last but not least, we're going to use the brush tool to whiten teeth. This is image number 2 on Canvas. So this image, you know, the white balance, maybe we could fix it just by altering just the white balance on the entire image. For example, we could go there and we'd probably get a more realistic color of what her teeth might be. But in the case that we need to do a little bit more, such as this, we're just going to use our brush tool. So we click B on the keyboard. Pretty low feathering, maybe 20 to 30 points over here. Low feathering. Good flow, good opacity. Okay, so now with this, we're just going to color over her teeth. Okay, and wherever we brush, it will take effect. Okay, so now we've made a brush selection. Again, if you hover over it, you can see where it is in red, and I can see I need to do this a little bit more. You can hit O on your keyboard, and that will bring up your mask overlay, which will allow me to see visibly in red where I need to paint, like if I'm missing any part or portion of her of the area that we need selected. Okay, feeling pretty good about that. So I'll click O again to turn that off. It's still there, but it's not visible to me. So I'm going to turn down temperature. I'm going to just try and suck out a little bit of the yellow, which in this case, since we already did, they're just going to turn blue. So I'm only going to go down about 5, maybe 10 points. Next thing you can do, you can also increase exposure to brighten them up all the way. There's the extreme example. We get that kind of phosphorus white. We're just going to go maybe just 0.5% there. The biggest thing that we can do, though, is desaturate. So we don't want to change the colors. We just want to take the color away. So we're just going to kind of take that away. And this is kind of a more honest approach, right? We don't necessarily want to oversaturate them like this or undercolor them like that, right? We just want to desaturate them a little bit so that the yellow isn't as yellow. So I mean, if you remember, I mean, teeth are just bones. So I mean, they're naturally not pure white anyway. But there we go. There we have it. Okay. So just working with those tools today. Yep. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you very much. Take care.